The first map humanity drew of the wider galaxy was a set of coordinates no one was allowed to broadcast. It started with a survey ship called Caldera, running quiet along the Orion arm where dust lanes chewed up long-range scans and comms turned into intermittent noise. The crew had been told the same comforting lie every young spacefaring culture tells itself. Intelligence recognizes intelligence. They found a beacon first. Not words, not math, a timing pattern like a heartbeat. Maravun, the linguist, listened until her eyes burned. "It's structured," she said, "but it's not greeting us, it's probing." Captain Rufuk Saluna kept Caldera on passive scans and low thrust. "We look," he said. "We don't announce." The other ship appeared near the shadow of a shattered planetoid. Long, blunt geometry, radiators wide, drive signature too clean. It rotated broadside on, the universal gesture of "I'm not pointing weapons." Mara sent primes anyway, a neat packet, a polite reach across the dark. The unknown ship accelerated. Not toward Caldera's nose, toward Caldera's wake, toward the faint ion trace the drives had left behind. It wasn't closing to talk. It was trying to tag an exit vector to learn how to follow. "They're marking our route," the navigator said, voice going high. Salena ordered a hard burn. The unknown ship matched Delta V without strain, then fired a tight beam, not at Caldera's hull, but into the wake itself, heating the trail like ink under a lamp. A photograph made of physics. Murrah's mouth went dry. "That's not curiosity." A second beam grazed Caldera's flank, scorching plating. Saluna stared at the damage indicator and made a decision he never wanted to make. "Return fire," he said, "minimal." Caldera had survey tools, not weapons. It fired a spray of tungsten pellets. The pellets shredded a radiator panel. The unknown ship answered by vaporizing Caldera's comms mast. The moment the antenna died, the bridge filled with the real sound of first contact. Silence where your voice should be. Caldera ran. It dumped logs into an old relay buoy and vanished into calm shadow, limping and terrified. The unknown ship didn't chase all the way. It lingered, transmitted one structured packet the buoy dutifully rebroadcast toward home, then disappeared. Human analysts later translated it into different words depending on who was selling the story, but the meaning stayed the same. Prey. The second contact wasn't a conversation, it was a raid. A mining platform in a marginal system was found gutted, nav logs stripped, stores stolen, crew dead in suits, frozen where they tried to seal a hatch too late. A child's drawing floated in a corridor, trapped against a vent grill. Earth didn't celebrate its first alien encounter. Earth built ships. The war that followed stayed local by galactic standards, fought in the Orion Arm's noisy transit space where comms were unreliable and stable jump solutions were narrow. It was brutal, improvised, and personal. Civilian hulls turned into gun platforms. Habitats became factories overnight. People who had never planned to fight learned firing solutions between heartbeats. Humanity survived by refusing to be predictable. When it ended, the enemy was pushed out beyond the lanes humans could hold. No parade followed, no grand declaration. Just a doctrine that became instinct. Don't broadcast routes. Don't teach strangers how to find you. Don't show your best knife first. Then humanity expanded the way survivors expand, along viable gradients inside calm shadows, with redundancy buried everywhere. The corridor wasn't a single line. It was overlapping transit solutions, decoy lanes, quiet logistics nodes disguised as maintenance yards, and stations that looked boring on purpose. 2 centuries passed. In that time, the Council grew outward the way most civilizations did. Slow surveys, relay chains, treaties, then settlement. Expansion was always a function of space topography for everyone. Transit stability, radiation bands, dust occlusions, gravitational noise. Every species learned the same lesson. You go where the math lets you live. The Orion arm remained expensive, noisy, inconvenient. Many council planners left it for later, which meant the council did not encounter humans until long after humanity's first war had already reshaped its culture. When the council finally ran into human traffic, it did so the way it encountered most frontier species, by bumping into working ships in a newly mapped lane. And the humans made sure those ships looked old. They flew patched freighters with conservative accelerations, outdated transponder styles, and radiators that screamed early-stage industry. Newer hulls stayed in calm shadow. In council-adjacent space, humans wore technology like a costume. So the council assumed the obvious. Humans were new, touchy, unorganized, a minor culture with rough manners and crude ships. Humans did not correct the assumption. Some wanted to, some didn't. Humanity wasn't a single mind. It was families and smugglers, engineers and idealists, veterans and profiteers, people who hated secrecy and people who treated it like oxygen. They argued. They lived. They watched. Then a council-aligned resource coalition hit a bottleneck and stared at the maps. The coalition called itself the Meridian Bloc. In public, it spoke about development rights and stability. In private, it needed volatiles, metals, and political wins. The Orion wedge beyond newly mapped lanes showed rich signatures and no registered claims, and a young species nearby with thin public presence. Meridian sent survey flotillas and extraction rigs with protection escorts. They planted relays and broadcast authority into regions that had been quiet by design. The first rig unfolded in an asteroid belt thick with feedstock. Refinery modules extended. Drill heads bit rock. Escorts settled into lazy patrol loops. A human freighter drifted through and got challenged. "Restricted zone," a Meridian patrol said. "Alter course." The human captain sounded tired. "This is a transit lane. It is now regulated." The freighter didn't fire. It kept drifting. The patrol commander, irritated, ordered a warning pulse. The pulse burned the freighter's plating. The freighter's cargo bay opened, and trash spilled out. It looked like debris until small drives flared on dozens of pieces. Guided masses slammed into the relay node. Antennae snapped. Shield panels cracked. A larger penetrator hit the node's core. The beacon went dark, then shattered into fragments. The patrol ship fired in anger. A beam carved a gouge into the freighter's flank. Atmosphere vented in a thin plume. The freighter rolled, clumsy on purpose, and vanished into sensor noise. The patrol chased. In belt clutter and drift hazards, chasing without local correction tables was a slow suicide. A human-launched ore chunk hit the patrol ship's bow. Armor buckled. Spall turned interior compartments into a knife storm. Air screamed out through new holes. The patrol ship tried to reorient, overcorrected, clipped a fractured rock, and turned a manageable field into a debris cloud. Fragments hammered the patrol ship until it came apart. Meridian called it piracy. Humans called it a warning. Meridian escalated anyway. They deployed a security net of relays and interdiction assets across primary transit solutions. They positioned boarding tenders at junctions. Their commander, Ulish, believed control was coverage fields and discipline. Ulish also believed humans were young. That belief lasted until relay platforms began disappearing without explosions. One went dark, then another, then a third. Ulish ordered active scans. The scans returned distorted echoes, but inside the distortion Ulish saw shapes. Cold, low-emission hulls moving with an ease that did not belong to new shipyards. Then one of those hulls slid into view for half a second and fired. Not a missile, not a beam. A dense kinetic storm. A Meridian drone platform went dead, as if its throat had been crushed. Two Meridian escorts charged after it, drives flaring bright heat signatures screaming. They hit guided masses seated in the noise. Point defense shredded the first wave. The second wave was shaped penetrators. Radiators tore, coolant vented, heat climbed. The shadow hull reappeared and put a single slug through one escort amidships. Inside, people died to spall and decompression in the same breath. Ulla stared at the feed and felt something cold settle. These were not patched freighters. These were warships that had been waiting. Their flagship among them was Stunnuff. Stunnuff's commander, Rull Nader, didn't broadcast speeches. She carved blindness into Meridian's relay chain and forced Meridian ships into louder, hotter movement. She didn't try to win in one clean formation. She denied leverage. Denied mapping, denied comfort. Meanwhile, civilians ran. On Micah Station, an algae farm habitat that had never mattered to any mapmaker, Louis Torres watched Meridian icons grow in the traffic net and made decisions with shaking hands. His daughter Anya clutched a small pack and tried to be brave. His son asked if they were really leaving. Louis lied the way parents lie, not forever. They evacuated because people like Joe Sato answered messages that said only one word: help. Joe was salvage, not military. Her ship, Lucky 13, looked like scrap welded into a working tug. Meridian sensors had learned to ignore ugly hulls. Joe led 3 habitat tenders out of Micah and into an unstable transit solution Meridian hadn't mapped, feeding correction packets in tight bursts. One tender drifted too wide and got pulled into shear. People screamed. The hull groaned. Joe snapped cut thrust, let it settle small burns. The tender obeyed. It eased back into the safe band. A Meridian scout drone followed their wake, curious. Joe didn't hesitate. She dumped a scrap mass, lit a tiny thruster, and smashed the drone before it could transmit. No packet out, her tech whispered, shaking. Joe kept moving. Her hands trembled anyway. While civilians fled, humans fought like humans. Messy, layered, not unified by stamps but by shared memory and anger. Militia craft hit relays with improvised drones. Smugglers jammed bands with raw noise. Privateers showed up for profit and revenge and occasionally decency. Veterans who had sworn they were done stopped pretending. And the shadow hulls did what they had been built to do. When a lash tried to place boarding tenders at lane mouths to seize inspection detainees, Rail made Meridian learn a boundary. Stone Knife struck a tender's clamp collar at close range. The slug crumpled mechanisms and punched into forward compartments. Marines strapped into couches died before they ever stood up. Others screamed in vacuum-thin air, suit comms broadcasting panic to everyone listening. A second tender was hit by a saturation swarm. Drones died in sheets under point defense, but a handful got through, punching holes, shredding control surfaces, forcing a spin. The spinning tender collided with an escort and crushed both hulls into torn metal. Meridian's line began to fracture. Their doctrine assumed the enemy could be fenced by a net. Humans weren't trying to win a parade. They were trying to keep civilians alive and make the wedge too expensive to hold. Then humans went loud. Not with exotic tricks. With infrastructure. A maintenance station that had sat in a quiet lane for decades peeled back panels and rotated a hidden mass driver barrel. It fired a tungsten rod large enough to matter. The rod hit Meridian's staging platform dead center. The platform didn't burn theatrically. It became fragments. Docked ships tore free. Fuel pods ruptured. The Meridian supply heart died in one brutal moment. Alash saw it and understood the real horror. Humans had embedded teeth in logistics. That wasn't a new species panic build. That was institutional memory. Alash ordered disengagement. Some ships obeyed. Others tried to keep fighting and died in debris and thermal failure. Humans did not chase into open lanes. They didn't need to. They weren't trying to conquer Council space. But Meridian was wounded, and wounded organizations bite. A damaged Meridian escort peeled off retreat and ran down the evacuation convoy's last vector. It fired on Lucky 13 first, aiming to cripple the convoy's guide. A beam burned a deep gouge into Joe's hull. Her cargo bay vented. Pressure alarms screamed. Joe's voice cracked over comms. "Keep the tenders moving, don't slow." Stone Knife arrived between the escort and the convoy like a slammed door. The escort fired. Beams scorched Stone Knife's armor and didn't bite deep enough. Rail didn't argue. She fired one close-range slug that turned the escort's forward compartments into spall and vacuum. The escort tried to run. Rail put a second slug through its drive cone. It spun, crippled, drifting away from civilians. Marek, Rail's boarding specialist, stared at the spinning ship and whispered, "Do we finish it?" Rail's voice was flat. "We don't need to." She opened a narrowband channel. "You chased civilians. If you try that again, we won't leave you spinning." Then she turned back to the convoy. Joe's breathing was loud. "My ship." "Can you keep moving?" Rail asked. Joe swallowed. "Yes, we're sealed, we're limping." "Then limp," Rail said, and for a moment her voice softened. "You're doing fine." The tenders vanished into a transit solution Meridian still couldn't map. Far behind, Meridian limped back toward Council space with wreckage and dead, and a political disaster forming like a storm. They had come for resources in unclaimed zones. They had met a civilization that used old ships as masks and kept its real strength in the dark. They had pushed until the mask slipped. Now Meridian tried to win without winning. They flooded Council channels with edited footage. They framed human strikes as piracy. They framed hidden defenses as militarized civilians. They offered integration packages to any human group willing to register and accept inspections. Meridian didn't need to beat humans in Orion again. Meridian needed the Council to cage humans on Meridian's behalf. Humans argued in every habitat and yard. Stay dark. Speak now. Hit Meridian's core logistics. Don't become the monster in someone else's story. Rail listened to the arguments and made a choice. If humans didn't shape the story, Meridian would. She asked for a witness. Through Havel's quiet channel, a council mediator and an oversight chair agreed to a controlled rendezvous. No Meridian presence, a neutral contact zone chosen by humans. The council delegation arrived cautious, in civilian, diplomatic ships loaded with defensive countermeasures. The mediator, S.A. Elin Var, obeyed human approach constraints and felt the difference immediately. The station they docked to looked like maintenance, but was built like it expected impacts. Rail met them in a plain room with a bolted table and a single screen. "Meridian says you're pirates," Chair Rail said. Rail didn't smile. "Meridian says whatever makes Meridian hungry in peace." S.A. Elin's voice was neutral. "You invited us to show proof." Rail played raw telemetry, Meridian firing on an evacuation escort, Meridian tenders deploying clamps with chatter about detainment for compliance leverage, unedited comms, time stamps, vector plots. Chair Rail's jaw tightened. Meridian claimed they never targeted civilians. "Meridian targeted the thing keeping civilians alive," Rail said. S.A. Elin asked the obvious question. "You hid your capability." Rail nodded once. "Yes, we wanted you to ignore us." S.A. Elin's eyes hardened. "That's not normal diplomacy." Rail's gaze didn't move. "Neither is being raided the first time you say hello." They might have talked longer. They didn't get the chance. System edge sensors lit up. Hot burns, multiple hulls, a boarding tender. Meridian. They hadn't followed comms. They followed importance. Meridian wanted the council delegates as leverage, and a propaganda victory in one package. Escalates said tight, "We leave." Rails shook her head. "If you burn out on open vector they intercept. You stay docked. We push the fight outward." Meridian broadcast on Council bands, while it accelerated in. Council personnel are advised to withdraw from hostile human custody. They were writing the story while they moved to seize the witnesses. Rail answered on the same band, crisp. "Council delegation under truce approach. Break off." Meridian didn't. A concealed mass driver on a nearby cargo platform fired first. One tungsten rod punched through Meridian's lead cutter and snapped it in half. Stone Knife and other shadow hulls slid out of calm shadow and went for the boarding tender. Kinetics crumpled its clamped collar. Another strike tore off its radiator wing. A final slug ruptured its drive cone. The tender spun, crippled and useless for hostage-taking. Meridian, frustrated, fired at the contact zone itself. A platform took hits, armor failing late. Atmosphere vented. Workers inside died in their work suits, tumbling into the dark. Rail allowed brutality in response. Stone Knife hammered a Meridian escort's heat systems until it couldn't maneuver, then dumped a shaped slug into its midsection. The escort began to die in slow disassembly, comms full of screaming and wet coughing. Meridian pulled back. This time, they couldn't crop the truth cleanly. A council chair and mediator had witnessed Meridian attacking a neutral contact zone with a boarding tender. Chair Rao went home furious. Escalates went home with cryptographic proofs. The council didn't move fast, but it did move. A formal inquiry convened. Meridian's development privileges in Orion were suspended. Meridian was ordered to stand down. Council enforcement was authorized to seize Meridian relay clusters and audit their operations. On paper, Meridian lost. In reality, Meridian's supply chains began to fracture. Competitors circled. Member worlds rationed. Panic crept into Meridian councils. Asen, Meridian's political architect, decided compliance meant death by slow strangulation. So Meridian chose a different death. A crisis. A false flag. They hit a council cartography outpost near the Orion boundary, Lattice 9, using proxy cutters scrubbed of identity and configured to mimic human kinetic profiles. They fired into its docking spine, breached habitat modules, ruptured a fuel tank, and killed civilians. Before fleeing, they broadcast a single line on a band the council would record. "Stay out of our space." Then they vanished, leaving wreckage and a narrative hook. Meridian expected the council to flinch and demand immediate corridor policing, which Meridian would offer to provide. They almost got it. Almost. Because Escalates VAR had seeded signature traps on boundary assets after the neutral zone incident, silent recorders capturing drive timing, calm handshake patterns, encryption offsets. Not names, fingerprints. The proxies hit Lattice 9 and ran. Escalates traps caught them anyway. Meridian manufacturing line timing, Meridian training sim packet offsets, a random encryption seed generator that wasn't random. Escalates stared at the proof and felt cold anger spread through her chest. Meridian had tried to frame humans by murdering council civilians. She didn't call a committee. She called Chair Rao. "You have your smoking gun," she said. "Meridian is cornered, expect a final grab." Rao's voice was tight. "They'll try to take something the council can't ignore." Escalates didn't hesitate. "Yes." Meridian saw enforcement mobilizing and understood the math. Warrants, seizures, sanctions, collapse. So Meridian executed the only move left. They would take a symbol and trade it back for survival. Earth. They still believed it was a singular center. They didn't know humans had layered redundancy precisely to prevent that kind of leverage. They didn't know the Earth Trail, Meridian had been following was bait. Rail received S.A. Eland's evidence packet through Havel and made a decision that ended the corridor's argument about restraint. "They murdered council civilians to blame us," she said aloud on Stone Knife's bridge. "No more games." She sent one message across the human net. "Meridian is making a final hostage strike. This is not harassment. Stop it here." Humans answered the way humans answer existential threats, not as a perfect unified spear, but as a rough mass of interoperable will. Militia hulls burned out from habitats and repair cradles. Corporate security fleets quietly activated obsolete systems. Privateers arrived because profit follows war, and some of them still had lines they would cross. Smugglers brought fuel caches because survival is logistics. Med ships staged because humans also refused to let the wounded become statistics if they could help it. Joe Sato undocked Lucky 13 with half-fresh plating still cooling from welders. Preet stared at her. "Joe, we're not fixed." Joe's voice was raw. "Then we limp." Meridian's strike group crossed the boundary at brutal acceleration, boarding gear and stasis cages aboard. They expected scattered resistance. They met a layered wall. Human platforms rotated concealed mass driver barrels into alignment. Militia craft formed loose screens. Shadow hulls waited in the gaps. Meridian broadcast in Council standard. "Stand down. Meridian is conducting emergency security operations." Rail answered in the same language. "You are conducting kidnapping. Turn around." Meridian fired first. Beams stabbed into the human screen. One militia craft was bisected, compartments venting in a silent bloom. A human voice screamed for half a second, then cut off. Humans returned fire with long-range kinetics. Slugs struck Meridian escorts. Armor held until spall began to bloom inside. Radiators shredded. Heat climbed. Meridian launched boarding pods. Humans did not allow boarding pods to touch. Point defense filled the space between fleets with intersecting lines of light and metal. Pods shattered. Marines died sealed in their own coffins, spinning away. One pod clamped onto a militia ship for a heartbeat. The militia ship vented external pockets, dumped ice and debris into the clamped junction, and fired a cutter charge. The pod ruptured. A Marine inside flailed, suit leaking, hands clawing at nothing, then went still. Merrick watched and swallowed bile. "This is ugly." Rail didn't soften. "Yes." Meridian tried to push through with heavier hulls, betting humans would hesitate under Council scrutiny. They misread the stakes. Council scrutiny was exactly why humans couldn't let Meridian reach any symbol and claim emergency oversight. A civilian platform fired a tungsten rod into a Meridian carrier's drone bay spine. The bay collapsed. Drones shredded themselves on launch rails. Power rerouted. Heat spiked. The carrier's output faltered. Meridian answered by burning the platform until armor failed. The platform vented. Workers inside died, tumbling into vacuum like slow punctuation marks. Rail's jaw clenched. Return fire. Stone Knife hammered Meridian heat systems and propulsion, not elegant shots but disciplined destruction. Radiators tore. Drive cones scarred. Meridian thrust dropped. Then shadow hulls cut Meridian's coordination core, a hardened relay node keeping tight beam comms synchronized. The node's antennae died, then its power spine. Meridian comms degraded from fleet to local shouting. Formation cracked. Humans adapted faster than doctrine. Privateers surged into gaps, loud and reckless, throwing chaff and cheap drones to confuse. Militia craft isolated Meridian hulls and overwhelmed them with concentrated kinetics. A Meridian escort pivoted, drifted into a debris cloud, lost radiators, began to cook, tried to run, took a slug through its drive cone, and spun venting atmosphere in violent jets. Meridian's commander screamed orders that no longer reached half the force. The final grab turned into a rout. Then Meridian did the thing desperate blocks do when they can't win. They threw a tantrum with a body count. A damaged heavy cruiser sprayed high-energy beams across a wide arc toward the densest cluster of human platforms. Not precision, punishment. A habitat module's outer skin flashed and vented. Civilians died in a place civilians were not supposed to die. Human comms went quiet for half a second. Then they came back furious. "Disable that cruiser," Rail said. "Now." Stone Knife and nearby hulls synchronized. They didn't shoot the bridge first. They shot radiators, heat sinks, power distribution. The cruiser's heat spiked. Reactor output throttled down. It slowed. Then Stone Knife put a shaped slug into the cruiser's forward hull. The cruiser began to collapse into itself, compartments venting one by one as internal supports failed. On comms, a Meridian voice screamed, coughed wetly as pressure dropped, then cut off. The cruiser died drifting, a broken monument to the moment Meridian crossed from scheme to mass murder. Meridian's remaining ships fled. Humans chased only the ships carrying cages and boarding gear. Those died first. When the firing stopped, the volume was full of drifting fragments, venting plumes, and silent wrecks that would kill careless salvagers for decades. Human medcraft moved in, scooping ejection pods where they could, because humans were still humans, some of them, despite everything. Rail kept Stone Knife between the debris field and the escape lanes, watching for one more desperate bite. The new contacts appeared at long range. Council enforcement ships. A mixed flotilla with disciplined burns and formal challenge codes that didn't sound hungry. Elin Var's voice arrived on an encrypted channel, tight but controlled. "Commander Nader, Council enforcement is on scene. Meridian leadership warrants have been issued. Stand down and hold position." Rail exhaled slowly. "We are holding." Elin asked the question the Council had avoided until it couldn't. "What are you?" Rail stared at wreckage and drifting bodies and answered honestly, but not fully. "We are a civilization that learned early," she said. "We hide because being seen gets you measured. Being measured gets you managed. Being managed gets you harvested." Elin's voice was quiet. The Council didn't know. "You didn't look," Rail said, "not cruel, just factual." A pause. Then Elin said, "We're looking now." Rail's mouth tightened. "Then look at Meridian, look at what they did, look at why." Council enforcement ships swept the perimeter, collected telemetry, and broadcast surrender orders. Meridian stragglers complied quickly. They didn't want to be captured by humans. They wanted the flag that promised due process. Humans let them go. Not softness. Politics. A captured enemy under Council custody was an anchor Meridian couldn't wriggle off. Meridian's end would be public. The kind of death organizations feared more than explosions. In the Council chamber, Chair Rao read Elin's evidence. Lattice 9, fingerprints, false flag, murder of Council civilians. Meridian executives were arrested. Some fled and were hunted down by enforcement. Asen stood trial and learned polished words didn't stop math and logs. Alash testified, eyes hollow, and said one sentence that ended Meridian's last defense. "We called them young because it made us brave. We were wrong." The Council reoriented slowly after that, the way large things turn. Blank chart regions gained a new label, unknown sovereignty risk. Development charters were rewritten. No extraction without verified absence, and even then, contact protocols that prioritized non-interference over inspection. It wasn't altruism. It was fear informed by evidence. In human space, life went on the way it always did. People repaired what could be repaired. Salvagers picked carefully through wreckage. Families mourned. Habitat councils argued about contact and trade and boundaries. Smugglers tried to monetize attention. Med crews kept working because bodies didn't stop bleeding just because politics shifted. Humans stayed heterogeneous. But one thing changed. The next time a block looked at a blank chart and saw "available," it would also see Meridian wreckage records, the neutral zone assault, the false flag, and the fact that a hidden power had been willing to turn a kidnapping attempt into a graveyard. It would remember there were civilizations that didn't announce themselves. Civilizations that wore old ships like costumes. Civilizations that fought with kinetics, logistics, and endurance, and only showed their teeth when someone tried to put a collar on them. Rael Nader stood on Stone Knife's bridge as Council ships departed, and the system's heat signatures faded back toward quiet. She felt no triumph. Only the heavy knowledge that secrecy had been a shield, and now the shield had a crack the size of galactic attention. Merrick stood beside her, voice small. "What happens next?" Rael stared into the void for a long time before answering. "Next," she said, "we decide what kind of power we are when no one can pretend we're small." The first Council ship to enter human space with permission did not arrive under a banner of friendship. It arrived under a banner of caution. Its transponder announced a commission of contact and boundary verification, an office created so the Council could pretend this wasn't fear. Its hull was painted in mediation colors. Its escort was small but real. Its comms were tight and disciplined. S.A. Elin Var was on board. Chair Ral was not. He'd stayed in the Corps to keep Meridian's trial from dissolving into compromises. S.A. Elin carried that absence like extra mass. She also carried orders. Observe, verify, do not provoke, establish a framework. In the same file, in a different tone, was what the Council actually meant. Find out how big they are, without making them angry enough to show it. The entry corridor was not a single lane. Humans provided a time window, a vector corridor, and a list of constraints that read like flight rules and threat warnings blended together. No active mapping. No relay deployment. No craft separation beyond X distance. No weapon bay cycling. No high-output burns within Y range of inhabited platforms. S.A. Elin read it twice and felt a grim respect. This wasn't hospitality. This was a safe handling procedure for volatile chemicals. Her captain, a calm Kethan named Jorkai, said quietly, "If we violate any of this, we will become Meridian in their story." S.A. Elin nodded. "Then we don't violate." They entered. The first human platform they approached was exactly what S.A. Elin expected after everything she'd seen. A maintenance hub with two thick bulkheads, redundant seals, and a traffic control array that didn't broadcast friendliness so much as competence. A human liaison met them over comms. Not Rael Nader. A different voice, older, rougher, with a patient edge that suggested he'd been doing this kind of ugly translation for a long time. "Havel," S.A. Elin said. "You made it," Havel replied. "Try not to get anyone killed." "I'll do my best," S.A. Elin said. Havel snorted. So did Meridian. S.A. Elin let the barb stand. "We're here to establish boundaries." "Then you should start by admitting you didn't have any," Havel said. The ship docked. S.A. Elin disembarked with a small team, legal, cartographic, security. All of them looked slightly sick, not from the air, from the awareness that the galaxy had been wrong for centuries and they were walking into the proof. The reception area was plain. No flags, no pump, just a bolted table, a dispenser that offered water and something bitter that smelled like roasted plant matter, and human faces watching them with the flat attention of people who had learned to distrust smiles. Rael Nader arrived 10 minutes later, still in a work suit, hair cropped close, eyes tired. S.A. Elin stood, "Commander." Rael didn't correct the title, she just nodded. Mediator. S.A. Elin's legal aid began to speak. Under council statute. Rail lifted a hand. No statutes here. The aide bristled. S.A. Elin cut in smoothly. We're not here to impose statute. We're here to propose an agreement that prevents Meridian-type actions in the future. Rail studied her. And how do you prevent Meridian-type actions? S.A. Elin didn't blink. By making them criminal, by enforcing that criminality. Rail's mouth tightened. The council enforced only when Meridian attacked council people. S.A. Elin's eyes held. Yes. That admission sat like a weight on the table. Havel leaned back and said, so now you want a boundary because you learned the hard way blank charts aren't blank. S.A. Elin didn't argue. Yes. Her cartography aide, a young Sarene named Tessa, opened a case and slid out a projection map. We propose a recognized human sovereignty envelope based on your declared inhabited systems and transit corridors. Rail glanced at the map and gave a short, humorless laugh. Declared. Tessa swallowed. We understand you will not disclose full internal charts. Rail looked at S.A. Elin. We won't. S.A. Elin nodded. Then we need a minimal boundary, enough to keep development charters out, enough to stop Meridian analogs from claiming ignorance. Rail's gaze stayed hard. Minimal boundaries become maximal curiosity. S.A. Elin's security officer shifted, uncomfortable. S.A. Elin leaned forward. Commander, the council is not one block. There are races that will be relieved you exist. There are blocks that will try to measure you. But after Meridian, there is appetite for rules. Rail's voice was flat. Rules didn't protect us before. No, S.A. Elin said. But now the council has an incentive, because you proved you can make our problems expensive. Havel laughed once. There it is. Rail didn't smile. We didn't want to be your incentive. S.A. Elin held her gaze. You are anyway. That's not an insult, it's reality. Silence. Then Rail said, we will give you a boundary, not everything, enough. You will mark it as non-developable without explicit invitation. Tessa's eyes widened. Explicit invitation from whom? Rail didn't hesitate. From us. The legal aide tried again. The council requires an accountable authority. Rail's eyes sharpened. Humans are not one authority. S.A. Elin interjected before the room turned into an argument spiral. Then, define a mechanism. A contact council. A rotating representative group. Something the council can treat as a counterpart without pretending your species is a single government. Rail's jaw worked. Havel watched her with a look that was half warning, half acceptance. Fine, Rail said finally. We build a liaison assembly. It won't be pretty. It won't be unified. It will exist. S.A. Elin exhaled slowly. That's enough. They negotiated for hours. Not about friendship, about constraints. No uninvited relay deployment within the envelope. No active mapping. No boarding actions on human hulls without human consent. No inspection language. Transit corridors treated as neutral access, routes only if both sides agree and publish constraints. Dispute arbitration through the Council Mediation Office, not through block security fleets. In return, humans agreed to something the Council could sell as integration, without making humans feel collared. A human contact registry that listed designated liaison nodes, specific platforms where council envoys could dock safely, and where humans could talk without exposing deeper space. S.A. Elin knew it was theater partly. She also knew theater mattered. Words became the rails that future violence either followed or couldn't. While they negotiated, the galaxy watched. Council news feeds ran endless panels on the hidden human power. Analysts argued about why humans hid. Cultural commentators speculated. Security hawks demanded audits. Trade blocs smelled opportunity. And in the margins, The predators watched the way predators always did. Not Meridian. Meridian was collapsing publicly now, leadership in custody, its charters shredded. Different blocks. Smaller ones, hungrier ones who saw Meridian's mistake and learned the wrong lesson: don't get caught, hit softer, do it quietly. One such bloc was the Hellion Compact, a mid-tier coalition whose worlds had long resented Meridian's dominance and now saw a vacuum. Hellion didn't have Meridian's scale, but it had deniable assets and a taste for leverage. Hellion didn't try to seize human space. Hellion tried to steal human tech. A Hellion research delegation requested docking at a listed liaison node 3 days after Sa-Elin's ship arrived. Their paperwork was impeccable. Their ship looked harmless. Their comms were polite. Rail's security officer flagged them anyway. Their hull has extra heat sinks. Sa-Elin's captain frowned. Could be defensive. Havel's voice was dry. Could be a thief. They allowed docking under strict constraints. Power limits, escorted movement, no internal network access. The Hellion delegation smiled and nodded and complied. Then they tried to plant a micro-relay seed in a maintenance conduit, something small enough to evade casual sweeps, designed to map traffic patterns inside the envelope over months. A human tech found it because the conduit's seal number didn't match yesterday's log. He didn't panic. He didn't call a committee. He called Rail. Rail arrived, looked at the device, and felt a familiar cold settle in her chest. Hellion's delegation leader, a sleek Plith representative named Sorrel, spread their hands when confronted. A misunderstanding, Sorrel purred. Our equipment must have. Sa-Elin cut in sharply. That is a relay seed. Sorrel blinked, still smiling. Mediator Va, surely you understand the council must verify. Rail's voice was flat. Verify what? That you will not threaten council stability, Sorrel said smoothly. Havel laughed bitter. There it is again. Stability means we get to look. Sa-Elin's jaw tightened. This violates the draft agreement. Sorrel's smile didn't fade. Draft. Rail stared at Sorrel for a long moment, then said, You will leave. Sorrel's tone cooled. You cannot expel a council delegation. Rail's eyes sharpened. Watch me. Sa-Elin felt the room teeter. One wrong move and this became the story. Humans expel researchers, proof they're hostile. She stepped between narratives like it was her job, because it was. Representative Sorrel, she said, voice calm and lethal. Hellion's action constitutes an attempt to deploy unauthorized relays in a protected contact zone. Under council protocol, that is espionage. You will depart immediately, and I will file a formal censure. Sorrel's smile finally cracked. You would censure Hellion. Sa-Elin didn't blink. Yes. Sorrel's eyes flicked, calculating. And if Hellion refuses? Rail's hand rested on the table, fingers still. Then you will discover how little we care about your paperwork. Havel added, almost conversational, and how much we care about people putting eyes in our walls. Sorrel made the only choice that kept Hellion from becoming Meridian. They left. The attempt was small, quiet, almost clever. But it mattered. Because it showed the galaxy's instinct would not change overnight. There would be more Hellions, more research delegations, more deniable probes. The Council could write new charters, but hunger had a way of slipping through footnotes. Sa-Elin filed the censure anyway. It hit Council feeds as a crisp, undeniable example. An external bloc had attempted unauthorized relay deployment in a human contact zone. Publicly, it strengthened the draft agreement. It made the Council's boundary verification office look necessary. Privately, it told every hungry bloc the same thing. Humans were being watched now, carefully, officially, and if you tried to sneak, you might still get caught. That was deterrence, too, different from kinetics but real. When S.A. Elin returned to the bolted table that night, she found Rael alone, staring at the projection map. "You're going to be tested," S.A. Elin said quietly. Rael didn't look up. "We've always been tested." S.A. Elin hesitated. "Now the tests will be dressed in diplomacy." Rael's mouth tightened. "Diplomacy is just slower violence." S.A. Elin didn't argue. "Sometimes, but sometimes it's the only thing that prevents faster violence." Rael finally looked at her. "Do you believe the Council will enforce this boundary when the next Meridian tries?" S.A. Elin held her gaze. "I believe the Council will enforce when it believes enforcement is cheaper than neglect." Rael's eyes narrowed. "That's not morality." "No," S.A. Elin said, "it's governance." Havel's voice came from the doorway. "Humans can live with governance. We just won't live with cages." S.A. Elin nodded once. "Then don't build cages for yourselves." Rael's expression softened by a fraction. "We didn't. Others tried." S.A. Elin looked at the map again. A blank region on Council charts now had an outline, imperfect, partial, but real. A label beside it, human contact envelope, non-developable. It was a bureaucratic phrase. It was also, in practice, a declaration that the galaxy could no longer pretend humans were a minor, new culture. It had to treat them as sovereign, which meant the Council's gravity would shift, trade routes would change, security doctrines would rewrite, small blocks would hedge, big powers would recalibrate. And humans, heterogeneous, stubborn, scawed, would have to decide what kind of sovereign they wanted to be. Not because they asked for the role, because the universe had finally noticed they were holding it. In a refugee habitat corridor, Anya Torres listened to adults argue about liaison assemblies and contact envelopes and council enforcement. She didn't understand all the terms. She understood the feeling. The galaxy was trying to draw lines around them now. She thought about the first time she'd seen Stone Knife on a screen. Not heroic, not shiny, just present between civilians and danger. Anya whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "Don't let them draw the wrong line." And far away, somewhere beyond the Council's neat borders, hungry eyes watched the new outline on the map and began planning how to slip a finger under it. The draft agreement became real when it was tested the first time someone tried to break it in public. Hellion's failed relay seed stunt was small, but it gave S.A. Elin exactly what she needed. A clean example that wasn't Meridian, wasn't war, and wasn't deniable without embarrassing half the Council's research offices. So the Council did what it always did when it was scared enough to be practical. It standardized. A boundary protocol was issued under emergency authority, not a treaty between friends, an operating rule designed to prevent the next resource block from lighting a fuse. Human contact envelope regions were added to the Council's master charts as a distinct category. Sovereign risk, non-developable, no charter without explicit invitation. The language was dry on purpose. Dry language made it harder for blocks to pretend they misunderstood. Then the Council did something it almost never did quickly. It created an enforcement lever that didn't rely on speeches, escrowed sanctions. Any block that violated a contact envelope lost access to Council credit clearing and intersystem freight insurance for a fixed period. No appeal until the period ended. No committee vote required. No loopholes. Hit the logistics artery and the appetite calmed itself. Meridian's collapse made that politically possible. Everyone had seen what unrestrained hunger cost. The galaxy still didn't become kind. It became cautious. That caution didn't stop probing. It changed the shape of probing. Where Meridian had come with fleets and boarding tenders, the next threats came as accidents. Lost ships, navigation errors, and third-party contractors who wore plausible deniability like armor. The humans noticed the shift immediately. because humans had been living under it for 2 centuries. Rail's liaison assembly formed the way human institutions formed under pressure: messy, resentful, necessary. There were habitat councils, who hated being represented by smugglers. There were corporate logistics consortia, who hated being represented by militia leaders. There were pacifist enclaves, who refused to sit in the same room as privateers. There were veterans who didn't trust anyone who hadn't watched a friend vent. They still showed up. Not because they agreed. Because every faction understood a simple truth: if they didn't define a counterpart, the council would pick one for them. Havel chaired the first session and kept it brutally short. "You're not here to like each other," he said. "You're here to stop outsiders from using your differences to cut you apart." A smuggler representative snorted. "And if outsiders offer better deals than you old paranoids?" Havel's eyes were dead calm. "Then you take the deal and you keep your mouth shut when your air runs out." Silence. Then a corporate delegate, a woman with polished hands and tired eyes, said quietly, "We need one rule." Havel nodded. "Say it." She looked around the room. "No one sells roots." No one argued with that. Not really. Elin met the liaison assembly twice in the first month. Both meetings were tense in different ways. The first was formal: boundary lines, corridor constraints, neutral docking procedures, arbitration language. The second was less formal: what humans would do if another bloc tried to take hostages again. Elin asked it carefully, the way you asked a question that could start a war. Rail answered without ornament. "If someone tries to see civilians," she said, "we kill their ability to see civilians. Fast, public, expensive." Elin didn't flinch. "Even if the council asks you to hold fire." Rail held her gaze. "The council can ask, we can refuse. The council doesn't own our restraint." That line landed hard, but it was honest. Elin filed it as both warning and reassurance. Humans weren't trying to become council police. They were drawing a line around what could never be negotiated again. The council, meanwhile, began to reorganize its own myths. For centuries, blank charts had been treated as future revenue. Now blank charts had to be treated as uncertainty, and uncertainty was a security problem. Cartography guilds quietly stopped issuing development optimism forecasts in Orion-adjacent space. Trade insurers raised premiums near contact envelopes. Security planners rewrote doctrine to account for a new category of actor: mature powers with minimal public signatures. The council didn't say hidden major powers in public. It said unregistered strategic actors. It meant humans. The deeper reorientation happened in the shadows of Meridian's trial. Meridian's leadership cracked in custody, not because the council tortured them, because the council didn't need to. It had logs. It had manufacturing fingerprints. It had financial records of proxy contracts. It had a timeline that showed intent. Asen tried to sell his favorite story: that Meridian had been forced into extreme measures by a dangerous frontier. The prosecution played the lattice 9 evidence, and then played the neutral zone assault with Elin and Chair Rao watching. Asen's story collapsed under its own weight. When the verdict landed, it wasn't just punishment, it was signal. Meridian was dissolved as a chartered bloc and broken into monitored successor administrations. Council enforcement seized relay assets in disputed space. Meridian's warships were impounded or scrapped under supervision. Its remaining executives were barred from holding charter authority. Meridian's worlds didn't vanish. They couldn't. They just stopped being allowed to eat without rules. That should have been the end. It was. Because Meridian's collapse created a vacuum, and vacuums attract things. Some of those things were legitimate: independent prospectors, research collectives, trade guilds looking for lawful access. Some were predators wearing clean clothes. A month after the contact envelope was posted, the first serious test arrived. A rescue ship from a minor block, registered, insured, polite, requested emergency entry into the envelope claiming a reactor fault and life support degradation. They transmitted distress in a way that was almost too perfect, almost too optimized for triggering Council rescue obligation clauses. Escalates flagged it as suspicious and asked the humans to handle it according to their own procedures. The liaison assembly argued for 12 minutes and then did what humans always did. They layered responses. A human med tender approached first, unarmed, broadcasting clear aid offers. A human escort ship stayed far back, cold and silent. A shadow hull watched from calm shadow, unseen but present. The rescue ship accepted the med tender's approach, then tried to slip a micro-drone out of a service port when the tender got close, tiny, stealthy, meant to attach to the tender's hull and ride inward to map deeper transits. The drone didn't even get a second of freedom. A point defense laser from the escort ship, fired so precisely it looked like a flick of light, cut the drone in half. The rescue ship went silent. Then it transmitted a complaint in Council standard legal phrasing about hostile interference. Havel's response was sent back calm and cold. Your reactor fault appears stable enough to attempt espionage. You will depart now. If you remain, we will treat you as an intruder. The ship departed. No explosions, no dead civilians, no propaganda footage. Just a lesson. The envelope was not a place you could accident your way into with tools hidden in your sleeves. S.A. Elin took that incident back to the Council and used it to harden the protocol. Emergency entry would be handled through designated liaison nodes only, with independent verification and strict inspection of outbound craft for deployed drones and relay seeds. The Council hated giving up rescue discretion. The Council hated the implication that it could be played. The Council did it anyway. Because everyone remembered Meridian. In human space, this new phase felt like a low, constant pressure rather than a war. Joe Sato found that life didn't go back to normal. It just found a new normal. Lucky 13 became famous enough that people recognized her hull scars in docking yards. She hated that. Fame made you easier to track. She got a contract she never expected, escort work for designated liaison convoys, civilian logistics support. It paid well. It also meant being watched by Council ships and human shadow hulls at the same time. Preet asked her one night, "Are we safe now?" Joe stared at the repair drone stitching a seam in her plating. "We're safer." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I trust," Joe said. On the refugee habitat, Louis Torres joined a reconstruction crew and began organizing returns to Micah Station under the new envelope protections. It was slow. Supplies were rationed. Some people refused to go back. Some were desperate to. Anya watched adults rebuild their lives with the same stubbornness she'd seen in battle feeds. One day she asked her father, "Do you think they'll try again?" Louis didn't lie. "Yes." Anya's jaw tightened. "Then why are we rebuilding?" Louis looked at her and felt something both proud and broken inside his chest. "Because if we don't, they win without firing." Anya nodded as if filing it away, a child's lesson in strategy. Rael Nader hated the new visibility most of all. Not because she feared the Council. Because she knew how attention worked. It dragged everything toward the center, toward measurement, toward management. The liaison assembly would be a pressure valve for now. It would also be a target forever. Elin, in her quiet way, admitted the same thing. "We will have factions that want to bind you," she told Rael during their last meeting before returning to the Corps. "Not to protect the Council, to control uncertainty." Rael's eyes were hard. "Then you'll have factions that discover how expensive control is." S.A. Elin didn't argue. She just said, try to keep it expensive without making it contagious. Rael's mouth twitched, no promises. When S.A. Elin's ship departed, it left behind something that mattered more than documents. A precedent. Council ships now approached human space as guests, not inspectors, because the rule had been written and enforced once. Blocks now treated blank space as risky, because Meridian's corpse had been displayed long enough to smell. The galaxy reoriented, not around a new empire, but around a revealed reality. There were civilizations that didn't announce themselves. There were places on the chart where hunger could get you killed. There were humans, old in space, not new, who would speak softly, fly old hulls in public, and only show their real teeth when you tried to put hands on their civilians. In the months that followed, the Orion arm became quieter, not because it was safe, but because every ambitious planner now had to answer an uncomfortable question at the start of every proposal. What if the map is lying because someone wants it to? And for the first time in a long time, that question made the galaxy hesitate. On Stone Knife's bridge, Marek looked out at the traffic plots, council transports moving carefully, human convoys moving under new procedures, privateers pretending to behave. He said, "Is this peace?" Rael watched the dark and didn't smile. "It's the pause after someone learns," she said. "Peace is what we build if they keep learning." Marek swallowed, "And if they do?" Rael's eyes stayed on the void, flat and certain. "Then we remind them." The next phase didn't begin with fleets. It began with a rumor that wouldn't die. On council networks, the rumor took 100 shapes. Humans had hidden weapons in infrastructure. Humans had warships older than some council dynasties. Humans had been quietly expanding for centuries. Humans were either a sleeping empire or a paranoid hermit crab with a gun. Most of it was nonsense. Some of it was. And the council, as an institution, had a weakness that no charter could fix. If you couldn't map it, someone would try. The contact envelope and boundary protocol made open violations expensive, but it also made humans fascinating. Every block that couldn't openly enter the envelope began looking for the same workaround: lawful access to adjacent space, then passive collection from the edge. Not intrusion, they'd say, observation. Observation became a new kind of crowding. Survey craft loitered near boundary markers. Merchant escorts held position a little too long. Scientific arrays appeared on platforms that were suddenly well-funded. Not Meridian-level aggression, a slow, constant push to make the boundary porous through attention alone. The liaison assembly felt it first in the way freight insurance rates spiked, in the way council mediation ships arrived more often, in the way every docking request carried extra questions hidden inside polite phrasing. Rael understood it immediately. This was control by accumulation. Not one decisive bite, 100 small nibbles that made a wall feel like it had always been a fence. Havel called an assembly session and said, "They're turning our boundary into a tourist attraction." A corporate delegate sighed, "Tourists spend money." A militia rep snapped, "Tourists also take pictures of your locks." A smuggler shrugged, "Pictures don't hurt." Rael looked at him, "Pictures become maps, maps become claims." The room went quiet. Because everyone in the corridor understood that sequence. It wasn't theory, it was history. S.A. Elin Var, still in the core, tried to damp it. She pushed enforcement audits against blocks whose observation stations exceeded their declared purpose. She tightened standards on sensor arrays near contact envelopes. She warned the council that crowding the boundary would generate incidents, and incidents would become excuses. The council listened, some of it. Enough of it to be annoying, not enough to be safe. Because the council also had factions that wanted the human mystery solved. Not to harm humans necessarily, to reduce uncertainty. And uncertainty, in council politics, was always treated as a threat. Then a new player stepped in, the Valen Synod. The Synod wasn't a resource bloc like Meridian or a mid-tier opportunist like Helion. It was a cultural religious coalition with real weight, famous for strict internal unity and careful public diplomacy. The Synod's worlds were stable, disciplined, and quietly influential. They didn't do frontier grabs. They did influence, which made them dangerous in a different way. The Synod proposed a grand integration initiative. It sounded generous. It was framed as healing after Meridian's crimes. It offered formal council recognition of the human contact envelope, trade corridors with guaranteed non-interference, and mutual defense clauses against unlawful raids. In exchange, the Synod wanted one thing: a permanent council observer mission inside a human liaison node. Not inspectors, not mappers, observers. The council loved it because it sounded like progress. Blocs loved it because it would normalize access. Smaller states loved it because it promised stability. Security hawks loved it because observer was just a polite word for eyes. Escalates hated it. She couldn't say that publicly without being labeled anti-diplomatic, so she did what she always did. She went to humans quietly. Her encrypted message arrived at Rail's liaison terminal with no flourish. The Synod will propose permanent observers. This will be sold as protection. It is also a wedge. If you accept, you normalize internal access. If you refuse, they will frame you as hostile to peace. Rail read it, then forwarded it to the liaison assembly with one line. This is the next Meridian, dressed nicer. The assembly exploded into argument. Trade consortia wanted it. Permanent observers meant stable corridors, better insurance, access to council markets. Some habitats wanted it because the word protection felt good after displacement. Militia leaders hated it. Observers today, inspections tomorrow. Smugglers hated it for a different reason. Observers mean we can't breathe. Pacifist enclaves were split. Some believed exposure would reduce fear. Others believed exposure would invite control. Humans were heterogeneous. The Synod had chosen the one kind of pressure humans were worst at resisting cleanly: internal disagreement. Havel chaired the session and looked older than he had a month ago. "They're not asking for ships," he said. "They're asking for presence." A corporate delegate leaned forward. "Presence is manageable if we control the node." A militia rep spat. "You can't control what someone records." A trade representative said, "If we refuse, the council will assume we have something to hide." Rail watched the room and felt her temper rise, not at the delegates, but at how predictable the trap was. S.A. Elin's warning was correct. Refusing outright would make humans look like the threat. Accepting would make the boundary porous by precedent. So Rail offered a third path. "We offer a rotating observer program," she said. "Time-limited, multi-species, strict constraints, no continuous presence." The corporate delegate frowned. "That's not what they want." "No," Rail said, "that's what we can tolerate." Havel nodded slowly. "And we require reciprocity." The room quieted. "Reciprocity?" someone asked. Rail looked at S.A. Elin's earlier words: governance, not morality, and used them like a tool. "If they want observers in our liaison node," Rail said, "we want observers in their observation stations near our boundary. We want eyes on the eyes." A smuggler laughed. "That'll go over well." "Good," Rail said. "Let it not go over well. Let them show their teeth first." The liaison assembly voted, not unanimously but enough. Offer rotation, time-limited, constraint-heavy, reciprocal. S.A. Elin helped craft the language so the council couldn't easily twist it into a refusal. It would read as cooperation with safeguards. The Synod responded publicly with calm disappointment. "We respect human concerns," the Synod spokesperson said, "but true trust requires consistent presence." Behind that politeness, the Synod did what it always did when it wanted leverage. It tested, not with a fleet, with a crisis. A Synod pilgrim ship, large, crowded, public, declared a navigation failure near the contact envelope boundary. It requested emergency entry for repairs and life support stabilization. Its distress call was amplified across council media, framed as a humanitarian moment. Humans saw the pattern instantly. It was a moral hostage. If humans denied entry, they would look cruel. If humans allowed entry, the Synod would gain precedent and access. Either outcome served the Synod's integration push. Escalates sent a tight warning: "This is theater." Rail's reply was shorter: "We know." But knowing a trap didn't mean the trap couldn't hurt. A pilgrim ship full of civilians wasn't something you could dismiss as an obvious ploy, without becoming the villain in someone else's story. The liaison assembly convened in emergency session. Arguments turned into shouting. Someone accused someone else of being Meridian in disguise. Someone else said, "If we let them die, we deserve the fear." Rail listened, jaw clenched, then said, "We don't let them die. We also don't let them in." "How?" Escalates asked over secure link, quiet and urgent. Rail answered, "We move the boundary." Not physically, procedurally. Humans had always built flexibility into routes and nodes. Now they used it diplomatically. They offered a solution. A human rescue convoy would rendezvous outside the envelope, transfer repair crews and supplies, and if necessary tow the pilgrim ship to a designated liaison node at the edge under full external monitoring, with the Synod's own observers present, with the ship's systems locked to minimum output, and with zero crew disembarkation. It was aid without entry. It was also humiliating to the Synod's narrative, because it denied them the "we were welcomed inside" moment. The Synod accepted, because refusing aid would expose the theater too clearly. Human tugs arrived. Med tenders arrived. Repair crews in suits crawled over Synod hull plating while Synod cameras watched every move, hopping to catch militarization or hostility. They caught none. They caught competence. They caught restraint. The pilgrim ship stabilized and drifted away under tow, never crossing deeper into human space than the designated edge node. Council feeds tried to spin it anyway. Some commentators called humans cold, others called them admirably disciplined. The Synod's spokesperson smiled and said, "We are grateful," while privately fuming that the wedge hadn't landed cleanly. Escalates filed the incident report with an emphasis on what mattered. Humans provided humanitarian aid without conceding sovereign access. The Synod attempted to generate precedent through public distress. This indicates future boundary pressure will be narrative-driven. The council read it and predictably split. One faction said, "Humans are reasonable, formal integration should proceed." Another said, "Humans are suspicious, we need continuous observers." A third said, "The Synod is manipulating, tighten rules on staged emergencies." The debate became the new battlefield. And in that battlefield, humans had a problem they couldn't solve with kinetics. They couldn't shoot a narrative. They could only outlast it, outmaneuver it, and occasionally expose it. Rail met with Havel after the Pilgrim incident and found him starring at a newsfeed clip of the tow operation. "They'll keep doing this," Havel said. Rail nodded, "Yes." Havel's voice was tired. "We can't keep reacting forever." Rail's eyes narrowed. "Then we go proactive." Havel looked up. "How?" Rail tapped the map projection. "We define what the envelope is publicly on our terms, not our routes, not our yards, but our principles." Escalates on SecureLink listened and said quietly, "A doctrine." Rail nodded, "A doctrine." She resisted that word for years because doctrines were what empires wrote before they marched. But humans were being treated like an empire, whether they wanted it or not. So Rael drafted something that wasn't a threat and wasn't a plea. It was a statement of constraints, backed by demonstrated capability. No boarding. No uninvited relays. No mapping inside. Humanitarian aid provided at the boundary. Trade by invitation through listed nodes. Civilians are red lines. And one final line, simple enough that even council media couldn't confuse it. If you try to take people, we will remove your hands. The liaison assembly argued about wording for days. Trade reps wanted it softer. Militia reps wanted it sharper. Pacifists wanted it framed as mutual respect. Smugglers wanted loopholes. They compromised because humans always did. The Orion Contact Doctrine was issued under the Liaison Assembly seal, with S.A. Elin's office acknowledging receipt and the Council registering it as a recognized boundary framework. The Council didn't love it, but it could not ignore it, because Meridian had already proven the alternative. In a refugee corridor that was slowly becoming a normal corridor again, Anya Torres watched the broadcast of the doctrine. She didn't understand every clause. She understood the last one. If you try to take people, we will remove your hands. She looked at her father and asked, "Is that okay to say?" Louis Torres thought about the Meridian boarding tender spinning in the dark. He thought about Lattice 9. He thought about the Pilgrim Ship Theater. He answered honestly. "It's not nice," he said. "It's necessary." Anya nodded, the way she did now quietly, like someone older than her years. Far away, in Synod halls, leaders watched the doctrine and smiled politely for cameras. Behind closed doors, they began planning the next test. Not because they wanted war, because they wanted certainty. And certainty, in the galaxy's oldest habit, was something you tried to buy with access, until someone made you pay for it. The Synod didn't answer the Orion Contact Doctrine with outrage. Outrage was for amateurs. The Synod answered with calm acceptance in public and a quiet question in private. If humans won't let us in, can we make humans come out? They didn't want a fleet battle. They'd watched Meridian's wreckage and learned the right lesson: don't swing at a knife wall. They wanted a controlled, moral-shaped confrontation that forced humans into a choice between looking weak or looking monstrous. So they built a crisis that couldn't be solved by towing a ship. They picked a place the Council would care about. A mixed-species transit bazaar called Amber Gate, just outside the human contact envelope. It was Council-registered, heavily insured, and neutral by statute. It sat on a stable exchange corridor where trade and news and people churned like blood through an artery. Amber Gate was also full of humans. Not official humans, not liaison delegates, contractors, crew, traders, medical staff, the kind of people who drifted where money and work were. Humans who'd lived their lives pretending to be ordinary because in council space that had been the whole point. The Synod funded a security upgrade for Amber Gate through a charitable foundation. It was framed as help: more scanners, better emergency pods, improved firefighting systems. Nobody refused. A month later, a Synod cultural festival was announced at Amber Gate. Pilgrims, performers, media. 1,000 cameras, 1,000 microphones, 1,000 soft-spoken commentators ready to narrate any incident as proof of something. Then the incident happened right on schedule. A terrorist attack, supposedly by human extremists furious about integration pressure. A cargo habitat module near Amber Gate's outer ring ruptured. Not enough to destroy the station, just enough to vent a section. 16 dead, dozens injured. A clean tragedy with just enough blood to make everyone lean in. Within minutes, Synod spokespersons were on feed calling for calm and for trusted external oversight to prevent further radicalization violence. Within hours, the Synod proposed the thing they'd wanted all along. Permanent observers at human liaison nodes, immediate council access to verify human compliance, expanded mapping buffers to ensure safety. The hook was simple. If humans refused oversight now, they were refusing to stop their own extremists. Elin Var watched the feed in her office and felt her stomach sink. It was Meridian's old trick, refined. Make a corpse, then sell the cage as medicine. She sent a message to Rail so tight it was almost rude. Ambergate incident is staged pressure. Do not react on open feeds. Investigate quietly. Do not let them define the culprit. Rail read it, then forwarded it to the liaison assembly with one line. They're trying to make us fight a story. We fight a fact. The liaison assembly did not agree on much, but they agreed on one thing immediately. If humans were going to be blamed for killing civilians, humans needed proof of who actually planted the charge. And the only way to get that proof was to do what humans did best in the dark. Follow the seams. Joe Sato was at Amber Gate when the module vented. Lucky 13 had been docked for 2 days, waiting on a parts shipment delayed by bureaucratic nonsense. Joe hated being stuck in bright space. Too many eyes, too many cameras, too many people who thought survival was a service you ordered. When the rupture happened, the station shook through her hull, and her internal alarms screamed. Her first thought was not politics. It was air. She threw herself into a suit sealed, and ran out into the docking corridor with a cutter torch because a maintenance hatch had jammed, and people were pounding on it from the other side. Preet followed her, face white, hands shaking, still moving. Joe cut the hatch open and pulled a bleeding Kethan dockworker into the corridor. The worker's eyes were wide with shock. It was an accident, he rasped. I saw. What? Joe demanded. The worker's voice cracked. I saw someone in a maintenance vest, not ours. They had a case. They. The worker coughed, blood bubbling in low gravity. Joe gripped his suit collar. Who? The worker's eyes rolled back. Preet swallowed hard. Joe. Joe's jaw tightened. Get him to med. Preet hesitated. You're... I'm going to find the bastard, Just said, and her voice was flat in a way that scared even her. She wasn't law enforcement, she wasn't military, she was salvage. Which meant she knew what accident looked like. This wasn't it. She moved through service corridors, following the smell of burned insulation and the station's chaotic calm traffic. She didn't carry a rifle. She carried a cutter torch and a stubborn refusal to be used. She found the first seam in a place nobody thought to secure, a waste processing bay where cameras were always down for maintenance. A tiny device was stuck under a conduit bracket, blinking in a pattern that wasn't station code. A micro-relay seed. Just stared at it cold. They weren't just staging a blast. They were staging a data trail, something that could be found later and linked to human networks. Prut's voice came through her suit, calm, shaky. You okay? Just swallowed, no. She ripped the device free, sealed it in a tool pouch, and keyed a secure ping on the human liaison channel, one she'd been given after the war because salvage eyes were useful. Roll, she said, I found a planted relay seed. Amber Gate, Waste Bay, I've got it. The response came back immediate, crisp. Hold position. Don't broadcast, don't touch anything else. I'm sending a team. Juz's hands trembled around the device pouch. This was a setup. I know, Rull said. You just made it expensive. 2 hours later, a human maintenance crew arrived at Amber Gate under the cover of legitimate repair contracts. They were ordinary looking, tool belts, scuffed boots, tired faces. They were not ordinary. They were corridor security specialists, the kind that never existed on council registries and never wore a badge. They didn't swagger. They didn't threaten. They walked like people who had seen vented friends and were done pretending. They met Ja in a service compartment, behind a recycling manifold. Rull didn't come. That would have been too visible. She sent Murrock. Murrock took the relay seed, looked at it once, and his eyes narrowed. "This is Synod-grade manufacture," he said quietly. Ja's mouth went dry. "You can tell." Murrock's voice was calm. "I can tell it wasn't human. I can tell it's not Council generic. And I can tell whoever planted it expected us to panic and do something loud." Ja laughed once sharp. "They picked the wrong day." Murrock looked at her, really looked. "You're shaking." Ja clenched her jaw. "Yeah." Murrock nodded as if that was normal. "So am I." He keyed his team. "Sweep the blast site, find their hands." They didn't sweep like Council police. They didn't put up tape and ask questions in bright corridors. They crawled through maintenance trunks and sensor closets, pulling logs from relay cabinets, checking seal numbers, comparing shift keys, mapping who had been where down to the minute. The Synod had been careful. Not careful enough. Because the Synod's charity security upgrades had introduced new equipment, and new equipment came with calibration logs, service codes, and a supply chain. Supply chains were where humans lived. Within 6 hours, Murrock's team had a list of 3 contractors who shouldn't exist, ghost IDs tied to a Synod foundation, and a shell maintenance firm registered on a Hulpun satellite world. The kind of chain that looked deniable until you pulled it hard enough to snap. They didn't arrest anyone. That would have been Council drama. They did something colder. They captured the one thing that mattered. A live comm burst. One of the ghost contractors, panicked by station lockdowns, tried to transmit a status packet off station using a tight beam microarray hidden in a vent shaft. Murrock's team let the packet go halfway. Then they traced it. Then they cut the transmission and took the contractor quietly, in a service tunnel with no cameras and no witnesses, except the air recycler humming overhead. The contractor fought like an animal and died like one too, hands flailing, helmet scraping metal, breath harsh in comms. Murrock didn't enjoy it. He also didn't stop it. Because the contractor reached for a self-erase capsule. Murrock crushed his wrist, snapped bone, and took the capsule anyway. Ugly, fast, decisive. No speeches. Ja heard later and sat in her cockpit staring at her hands until Prut finally said, "We're not like them." Ja's voice was hoarse. "We're becoming what keeps us alive." Prut swallowed. "Is that different?" Ja didn't answer. Alun got the evidence 12 hours after the blast. The relay seed, the comm trace, the contractor's gear, the shell company chain, and a captured capsule whose chemical signature matched Synod covert trade catalogs. Alun stared at it and felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. The Synod had murdered civilians at a neutral bazaar to force access into human space. And they had done it with enough sophistication that only someone who understood secrecy cultures would catch it fast. Humans had caught it fast. Because they were one. Alun didn't take it to a committee first. She took it public. Not as a screaming accusation. As a sterile, undeniable data package released through the Council's own enforcement channels with a formal request for immediate Synod audit. The Synod's public face held for 20 minutes. Then it cracked. Synod spukspupla dunnad, then reframed, then demanded to see raw evidence privately, then accused Alun of being compromised by humans, then, finally, made the mistake that killed their narrative. They called for an emergency observer deployment to human liaison nodes to preserve peace. Right after being accused of staging murder to force observer deployment. The galaxy watched that timing and understood, even if it didn't want to. The Synod's hand was on the knife. Chair Rull, back in the core, moved like an old predator who'd been waiting for prey to blunder. He convened an emergency session and did not allow speeches. He played the calm trace. He displayed the supply chain. He showed the capsule chemistry. He put the Synod's own humanitarian proposal timeline beside the Amber Gate blast time stamp. Then he asked one question calmly. Is the Synod still fit to lead an integration initiative? The answer wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Council enforcement raided Synod Foundation offices. Synod ships were boarded, legally, publicly, with cameras rolling, to seize security upgrade, equipment, and contractor lists. Hulpun screamed about sovereignty when its shell firm got audited, and then went quiet when the financial records showed it had been paid. The Synod tried to rally moral outrage. It didn't land. Because the dead were too real, and the evidence was too clean, and humans had been disciplined enough not to give the Synod a counter-atrocity to point at. Rull Nader watched the council feeds from Stunnuf and felt no satisfaction. We're going to be blamed anyway, Murrock said quietly. Rull's eyes were tired. By some, always. Murrock's jaw clenched. We didn't do it. Rull nodded. No, but we caught it. That makes us dangerous. Huv joined the channel, voice grim. The Synod is going to fracture. Their extremists will blame us. Their moderates will try to save face. Either way, someone will take a swing. Asa'alan's voice cut in on SecureLink, low and controlled. The Council is issuing a revised protocol. Rull didn't look surprised. What kind? Observation crowding near contact envelopes is now restricted, Asa'alan said. Boundary stations must register sensor arrays and accept reciprocal inspection. Stage distress entries are now a criminal category. And this is the part you'll hate. We're creating a standing, contact guard presence at the envelope edge. Rull's eyes narrowed. A permanent fleet. Outside your envelope, Asa'alan said quickly. Not inside. Officially to prevent blocks from doing Meridian or Synod. Unofficially to reassure the Council's nervous factions. Huv snorted. So you're putting a patrol line outside our wall. Asa'alan didn't deny it. Yes, because if we don't, someone will keep testing you until one test turns into a war. This is containment of hunger, not containment of you. Rull's voice was flat. Containment is still a word we hate. I know, Asa'alan said, but this time it's pointed outward. Rull held silence for a moment, then said, fine, outward, and if it points inward even once. Asa'alan cut in softly, then you remind us. Rull didn't smile. Yes. In human space, the liaison assembly met, and for once, the argument was shorter. No one had to be convinced. The galaxy would keep trying to slip fingers under the boundary. Amber Gate had proven it. So they refined the doctrine. Not sharper, clearer. They added one clause that made council lawyers sweat. Any attempt to manufacture incidents near the envelope to force access will be treated as hostile action. Evidence will be shared publicly. Retaliation will be targeted and proportional to capability, not to affiliation. Translated into plain human. If you try to set us up, we will expose you and cut your tools. The galaxy absorbed that line the way it absorbed all lines backed by real capacity, reluctantly, then with calculation. A month later, Amber Gate's dead were buried. Memorial feeds ran. Compensation funds were established. The Synod's integration initiative died quietly, replaced by a more cautious, contact normalization plan that didn't dare ask for permanent observers anymore. Humans returned to rebuilding again, because humans always did. Micah Station reopened in pieces. Louis Torres went back with a repair crew and found the algae vats still humming, stubbornly alive. Anya walked a corridor she hadn't seen in months and touched a wall panel like she was confirming reality existed. Joe Sato took a contract at Amber Gate for salvage and security assistance, unofficially. Officially, she was just a tug captain. Unofficially, she had become the kind of person who noticed seams. Preet asked her, "Are we done being a target now that the Synod got caught?" Joe stared at the empty bay where the ruptured module had been patched over with new plating. "We're a target because we exist," she said. "Not because they hate us, because we make their map complicated." Preet swallowed. "So forever?" Joe shrugged, tired. "Forever is a long time. Humans are good at long." And in council space, the map changed again. Not with dramatic new borders. With new habits. Bloc stopped assuming unmapped meant available. Committees stopped assuming inspection was a neutral word. Insurance models began treating hidden powers as normal variables. The council had been forced, by Meridian, by the Synod, by humans, to accept a truth it had spent centuries avoiding. The galaxy wasn't organized around its paperwork. It was organized around whoever could enforce their boundaries. Humans had enforced theirs. Not by conquering, by making predation expensive and lies risky. Rail stood on Stone Knife's bridge, watching traffic patterns settle into a cautious rhythm. She didn't trust it. She never would. Merrick came up beside her and said, "So this is what power looks like." Rail watched a council contact guard patrol line form at the edge of the envelope, outward-facing, polite, uneasy. "No," she said, "this is what power costs." Merrick's voice was quiet. "And what does it buy?" Rail stared into the dark for a long moment. "Time," she said finally. "Time to live like people again." She didn't say the other part, but she felt it in her bones. Time to build the next layer, in case the galaxy forgot the price.